Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back. We go around the room and say our names. I'm George.
Dennis.
My name is Stephen.
Tony.
Peter.
Matthew.
My name is Cass. My name is Jeff.
Marty.
Bob.
Jack.
Don.
My name is Gary.
Mark.
My name is Michael.
David. Greg.
My name is Andre. Vin.
My name is Christian.
And Jason 1.
Jason only.
I'm Tom.
Jay.
My name is Joe.
I'm Greg.
I'm Mike. I'm Samuel.
Still Tom.
Justin.
I'm Brad. Everybody? And Clark is coming in. Our speaker's name is Tom Moon. Tom Moon is a native San Franciscan and has been a Buddhist practitioner for 24 years. He's a psychotherapist in private practice and works with a primarily gay male clientele. His chief professional commitment is to explore the interface between Buddhist practice and psychotherapy. Tom writes a bi-weekly column, The Examined Life, which appears locally in the San Francisco Bay Times. An archive of this columns, as well as his spiritual manifesto, Spirit Matters, can be found on his website, www.tommoon.net. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
What I wanted to talk about today is the practice of self-compassion. I've been very impressed, as have a lot of people, with Kristen Neff's work, her book on self-compassion. I saw a copy here last time I was here. I know people are reading it. I did a training with her in June at Spirit Rock, and she's quite a rock star. I mean, I wanted to get her to sign my book, but there were 100 people ahead of me, so I didn't. And I think it's well, first of all, what she's doing is very good work. She's divided self-compassion into 3 components, and the idea is that all 3 of these components can be learned and practiced, so that self-compassion is like a muscle, and you can strengthen it deliberately, which I think is good news for Americans, because we're really, I think, we're really hard on ourselves. Most of us have pretty active inner critics. Perfectionism is a big problem for many of us. So I think this is a good antidote. The book is worth reading, and the practices that we're doing. Just to list her 3 components are kindness versus self-criticism, common humanity versus isolation, and mindfulness versus over-identification. I think she teaches them in the wrong order, personally. So I'll go through it and go backwards. Mindfulness versus over-identification would be the first component. And the reason I think it's the foundation, of course, is that you can't respond compassionately to your suffering unless you're first aware that it's there. The Buddha defined compassion as the quivering of the heart in response to the awareness of suffering. Well, you can't quiver if you aren't aware of the suffering, right? What, as therapists sometimes say, you can't heal what you can't feel. But I think that if we're going to use mindfulness to respond to compassion, we need to understand mindfulness, I think, correctly, in a different way from where it's often understood. Because the term mindfulness includes the word mind, which tends to suggest or connote a kind of dispassionate, distancing, coldness, purely mental activity. Something detached and emotionless, too, I think, which it isn't supposed to be. A while ago, a mansplained Buddhism to me by saying Buddhism is all about detachment. That's the fundamental thing in Buddhism. And meditation is reaching this state of kind of lordly indifference and aloofness from all experience, and that's the end of suffering. And my response was, ew, why would I want to live that way even if I could? So I think the term can take us in the wrong direction, can suggest a misunderstanding, it can create a misunderstanding of what the process is. At least that's what happened to me for a few years. Because the practice of mindfulness is supposed to be a practice of engaging the present with the whole of your being. I'm told that Jack Kornfield doesn't even use the term anymore. He speaks of presence instead. And some other people have been talking about heartfulness as a better term for what we're doing. Ajahn Brahm calls it kindfulness. He's written a little book on the subject, kindfulness. It says, don't just be mindful, be kindful. It's an interesting book, and it's the whole idea in his approach is that that we establish a sense of kindness and open-heartedness toward our experience as we sit down, and that's the basis of mindfulness. And then everything else, counting breaths, concentration, and stuff, is on that foundation. The path to enlightenment is often compared to a bird. You've heard this phrase, this metaphor. One wing is wisdom, and the other wing is compassion. So in that, and that's a useful way of looking at things. In that view, the wisdom wing is mindfulness and equanimity, and the compassion wing is metta and mudita, forgiveness practices. So, and then you get to enlightenment that way. But what's interesting about that metaphor is that it says that the bird can only fly by using two wings, right? It all happens at once. So we can think about mindfulness over here and compassion over here, but in fact, it all has to arise together if you're going to get anywhere, I think. So I did an experiment a few years ago because at that time I was thinking we should call it heartfulness, I know mindfulness is the word we have, but I thought, let's think of it as heartfulness. So I did an experiment both here one Sunday, 3 years ago, maybe 4, and also at Mission Dharma. And what the experiment was to do 2 1-minute meditations. And the instructions were pretty close in each one, but they were different. So in the first meditation, the instructions were, for the next minute, close your eyes, sit quietly, anchor your attention on the breath, and be mindful of whatever arises. The second meditation, it was, for the next minute, close your eyes, sit quietly, anchor your attention on the breath, and open your heart to receive whatever arises. And what surprised me, here, and there are experienced meditators here, and at Mission Dharma, but people experience the meditations differently. At least everyone who spoke said the second one was deeper, more focused, more just plain enjoyable than the first. So this phrase is really important. I think if we're going to use mindfulness in the service of emotions like compassion, it's really important to establish mindfulness as a heartful practice. So ways to do it are you can begin a meditation with metta phrases. May I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be... And then, establish yourself in the wish for your own happiness and your own well-being. And maybe, may I respond to whatever arises with kindness and compassion, whatever you want to say. And then let go and just do the practice and see what the difference is. Another practice is to put the hand on the heart. You might even try this if you want. And then close your eyes and just feel the warmth of your hand going into your heart. For many people, just that gesture for a minute is a very soothing, heart-opening gesture. Very interesting. This is the heart chakra, traditionally the seat of feelings. And whether you believe that or not, this seems to be where a lot of feelings are experienced. Experientially, this is this. So to bring your awareness to your heart seems to be helpful in opening it. Ajahn Brahm suggests visualizations as a way of doing this. He says, imagine a golden radiance emanating from a beautiful white lotus flower in the middle of your heart. Allow that radiance to expand in all directions, embracing more and more living beings until it becomes boundless. And then he says, end the meditation, and then you go into mindfulness, and then you end the meditation by visualizing the golden radiance of kindfulness being drawn back into the lotus, but you leave the warmth outside. I think for a lot of people that's a little too gushy, but some people, if you like visualization, that can be a powerful method for establishing the intention in every mindfulness practice period that I'm going to be kind to myself, that this mindfulness practice is about self-care and self-love, openness to whatever is experienced, including the suffering. And then, when suffering arises, the quivering of the heart presumably will happen naturally. And then mindfulness becomes an exercise in compassion and awareness. The takeaway line that I got from Kristen Neff's workshop, her whole talk on mindfulness was summed up in one sentence. Okay, rest your awareness not in your pain, but in the love that enfolds it. Rest your awareness not in your pain, but in the love that enfolds it. So you're mindful, but you're not just swamped with pain, but you are aware of the loving kindness and the compassion that enfolds it. That's really the whole what she has to teach about mindfulness. The second two were common humanity and self-kindness. So common humanity is how we differentiate compassion from self-pity. A friend of mine had a grandmother who had lived her entire life healthy. She never got sick a day in her life. Then at 91, she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And her response was, why me? Right? I mean, it's really amazing that the human mind can do that. You can live 91 years and not notice that sickness, old age, and death happen a lot, So she has, because she couldn't, she saw herself as victimized by her suffering and singled out. It was impossible for her to be self-compassionate because right off the bat, she's separate from other people. So common humanity, according to Neff, is the practice of understanding your suffering as part of the story as part of human suffering, as part of everybody's suffering. So if a friend dies and you're grieving part of your meditation can be not just acceptance of your suffering, but also, for instance, sending kindness to everyone in the world who's lost a friend recently. You know, and what that is connecting. So it can be misunderstood. This practice as, you know, people are starving in Africa, so shut up. I mean, that's not exactly the point. The point is not to minimize your own suffering, but to see it as part of what you join with other people, you share with other people. And then the final one is words of self-kindness. So most of us, I think, most Americans are pretty self-critical. You know, the inner critic is very active. Perfectionism, as I said, is another big issue. I mean, for a lot of people, there are two states: perfection or failure. You know, if you're not perfect, you're failing. And we really are hard on ourselves. It's really amazing as a therapist to hear what people do to themselves. They report their suffering, which is painful enough, and then why they're wrong for having it, and and why they hate themselves, or why they made these mistakes, and what's wrong with me, and so on. So words of self-kindness is just an intention when you suffer to offer yourself, metta phrases. May I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be well, may I be safe. May I respond to my suffering with kindness. And do that as a regular practice. Okay. Then, so to put it all together, you can do all three of these things in like 30 seconds. What you can do when you're suffering, you can be first the mindfulness, hand on the heart, and just aware, I am suffering right now. This is suffering. And then my suffering is part of the suffering of all humanity. That phrase. And then, may I respond to my measure of suffering with wisdom and kindness, or whatever you want to say. So those three phrases encapsulate all three of her components. And hopefully that is a little course correction in your day when you're suffering that, can have major impact. That's really that's my whole act, basically. I'd like to have a discussion, if we can, about the subject of self-compassion. Sir?
Can you define when you say, when I'm suffering, I'm going to do this? What do you mean exactly? Because there's all this spectrum. Is it just mean I'm feeling something I don't want to feel in this moment? Or I'm emotionally dysregulated? It's like, I think suffering the word gets used in a lot of different ways.
Sure. It's a big word.
I'm stressed out. Is that suffering?
I think so.
Oh, okay. I mean, I'm just curious,
Well, whenever I'm feeling something I don't want to feel, I think it's a good clue that it's suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Because that the human mind naturally wants to pull away from suffering. And yeah, it's a big, big, big word. I mean, it covers everything you mentioned. Stress, anything you don't want to feel, basically. Minor stuff, big stuff.
With the goal of just being happy all the time.
No.
I mean, that's what it feels like it's trying to move towards.
Well, the path of Buddhism is the path to the end of suffering. Not, I don't know about being happy all the time, but the ending of suffering. I haven't reached that place yet, personally, and I also don't know anyone who has. But I do believe that these practices help me suffer less. And compassion too is kind of an interesting feeling because there's a poignancy in it. Compassion the quivering of the heart is a kind of suffering, is a pain. It's a pain but it's an open-heartedness as a response to suffering. And it makes the suffering a little more bearable. Does that help you?
Thank you.
Clark?
It's like such a pleasant surprise. I'm just teaching week 7 of my
first course teaching mindful self-compassion.
Oh, really?
And yes, I'd say it's about like half people who are identified as LGBT, including a former student of mine who's gender non-binary, three gay men, I think. Oh, counting the part of 40 men. So it's been really interesting, and I think two things that I might share in response to like what you were dialoguing with David about is that the suffering, I think, is a bad translation of dukkha. So if the suffering just means constellation of things that's huge that are unwelcome, that we'd rather, and I think Philip Knopf has this great discussion in one of his books about the different kinds of dukkha, and one of them is change is one of them. So even if something's pleasant, like I'm looking at that statue and I really like that one, but somebody else said they didn't really like that one, they liked the old one. So change is part of life. It doesn't have to be I got cancer. So even when we have something that's beautiful, like on this beautiful view, it can be a cause of suffering because impermanence causes dukkha.
Yeah.
One. So it's a whole very mild, from very mild to cancer, right? And then the other thing I think that's useful, especially for LGBT people and for minorities, is that although I think Kristen's work at times is about, sounds like the yin of self-compassion, like just let me be kind to myself and counsel myself in a kind voice. She also talks about the yang of self-compassion.
Fierce compassion.
Yeah. Not necessarily fierce. Like, so
well, that's not the term she used in the workshop that I did.
Yeah. So it includes, like suffering, like dukkha. Like big dukkha, something's got a variety, but one version would be, yes, fierce. So she has a son who's very severely autistic, and people sometimes criticize her on planes because why are you not controlling your son? And so sometimes she's very fierce, maybe, about explaining to them or telling them to stop that. But at other times, it's not necessarily fierce, aggressive, it's motivating. So her third question is, what do I need right now? And sometimes that's comfort, and sometimes it's something else. Like to give like an example, probably a lot of people feel sleepy from meditations and stuff. So she would say, don't try to keep yourself awake, but like maybe ask yourself, what do I need? Oh, maybe I need a nap right now. So it's, and it's not, the goal isn't to be happy all the time. It's that they're not I think the suffering is the reactivity, like the second arrow. So there'll still be unpleasantness, including unpleasant emotions. Like even the Buddha was unhappy when a relative died, and said like all the lights in the world went out. So it's not like the end of unpleasantness. It's just the end of this layer of rest and to keep it going on. But it's been the best thing that I ever. We were in the DPP together years and years ago.
I know.
Which I loved, but I really have loved mindful self-compassion. She's a great teacher.
Yeah, she's very much onto something. She says, I'm not a Dharma teacher, and she said that she has an imposter syndrome even teaching, but there was just a sea of people there, and they were all, she was the guru for the day, for sure. But anyone else have that? Sir?
I really appreciate your talk, and thinking of Ramdas' used term, loving awareness. I am loving awareness. And identifying with the loving part, like you were talking about, and the awareness itself, which it's not detached or just unfeeling at all.
Right.
Yeah.
I like that. That would be a good phrase for men. I'm going to practice loving awareness. And I think what I learned from Ram Dass was that awareness is not unfeeling or dispassionate. It is inherently warm for whatever it sees, loving.
Yeah.
At least I think that's my experience of it.
Yeah.
I had an incident about a month ago in which this really came up for me. Somebody stole something from me, and I had a lot of negative self-talk about why I didn't do what I could have done to prevent it from happening, and going through that round and round. But I also felt that it was important for me to have compassion for the thief too, because to live a life in which the only way somebody can manage to, whether it's feed his family or survive, is to steal from somebody else. I thought that it was also helpful to me to have some compassion go in that direction as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, self-compassion is a basis or a beginning, but the whole purpose of it, well, not the whole purpose, but one of the main purposes of it is to extend compassion outside of oneself. The reason I'm talking about self-compassion today is I think most of us are better at compassion for others than we are for compassion for ourselves. And the research that she did shows that if you can increase your own self-compassion, compassion for others increases in the same way. Because compassion, if you think about it, has one taste. It's one kind of feeling. And you can talk about self and other compassion, or you can talk about inner compassion and outer compassion. But it's really all the same. It's a response to suffering. This is how she answers the criticism that, well, you're using the S word there, self-compassion. That's almost as bad as the G word in some Buddhist circles, But that was her response, was that there's inner directed compassion and outer directed compassion, and they're really the same kind of experience.
So I have a question.
Jason.
Yeah.
One.
Jason one. Yes, exactly. So I have a question and a response. So my question is in regards to, you laid down the three components that how she lays it out, and then you flipped it, or you
flipped it
made
around.
a choice and you explained to us why that works for you, but I didn't quite get the explanation of how she explains her setup.
Well, I wanted to talk to her about that. I wrote her an email which she never answered, because it was curious to me. Why did you start with mindfulness?
She doesn't say anything about that in her book.
No, she just lays it out, and but actually I noticed when she teaches it, she'll usually start with mindfulness. So I was curious about it. I'm sure she has a great explanation. She's very smart and she knows her stuff. But anyway, so when I present it, I just start with the basis of it being mindfulness.
So my response was, I kind of had a reaction when you were sharing the writing, the meditation, and you said, "Oh, this might be too gushy for some people." And as a gushy person, I just was like, "Okay, well, what's the challenge in that for those people?" And I just sat here thinking like of Alan Watts, and he talks about those who are the prickly people and those who are the gooey people.
Yeah.
But I think within Buddhism, I think it's an important thing. It's like, well, maybe for a prickly person, a gushy thing is going to feel uncomfortable. So how do you sit in that discomfort? And how is that an act of developing self-compassion, of having to be with what... I felt like what I also got from when you read it is that you quickly read it, you didn't give any of the words significance, and there's a lot of significance in what is written in those words. And to actually, as a performing artist, I hear it, how you said it, and I'm like, well,
damn it.
Can you actually give some emphasis to it? So,
as a prickly person, I plead guilty.
So how to, I just acknowledge that as like, well, maybe that's a prickly person's place to have to sit with, well, what comes up for them, that gushiness.
Yeah, and I've done that meditation, and I've liked it. It's not the way I do things, but gooey people have the right to exist too, and I mean, we should all be what we want. And that was a pejorative term.
That we should be, that we should be able to offer, that we should be able to help, right? A prickly person become a little bit more gooey, and a gooey person become a little bit more prickly, right? Like there should be, right? That should be. I hope Buddhism is helping us to try to find the equanimity around, right?
Yes. Well, the reason I do Buddhist practice is I'm in such need of it. So, yes, I hope so.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
So, I think appreciated what you were saying about mindfulness versus mindfulness, or another way to describe it. I think it's really about loving embodied awareness. And one of the great tools to help with that, as I find, is the Enneagram, which identifies that we have these three centers of intelligence: the belly, the heart, and the mind. And so it's cultivating contact with that really helps us become more present. And it also it describes why some of us feel more gooey than others, because some people are
more
very deep with the heart.
Yes.
Others are, when you talk about mindfulness, it's because we have a culture in which we're so heady all the time, it gets in the way of actually embodying and inhabiting ourselves. There's a great deal of wisdom that we experience through the body.
Yeah, I agree. And the term for mind in the Pali language, is closest to what the Buddhists quote, is sita, but that's also the word for heart. Heart and mind have the same word. They don't differentiate between the two, and thought was believed, as it is in other cultures, to happen here. And people experience their thinking here. We have a kind of Alan Watts talks about this, that we hallucinate that it's in here. It's as if, this is the central system here, and this is where we are. We experience ourselves as kind of behind our ears, behind our eyes looking out. It's kind of interesting. That is really just that's not right. I mean, that's just a convention or a cultural hallucination of ours. It's kind of, and also belly, heart, and mind, they're not really set. I mean, we can work with things that way, just like we can do the two wings of the bird. But really, it's all one system, right?
Yeah, it's ultimately about integration, but it's also helpful to sense the differences.
Yes, that's right.
I take Qigong in this room, and we sometimes do exercise where we put our hand on our heart, and the goal is to bring our breath down to the belly. And according to that teacher, that's where we get stuck in our emotions and our heart. So it makes sense too.
It's very interesting how we talk about our feelings too. I have a heavy heart. I have an open heart. All these are metaphors, but they're not just metaphors. They're how we experience things. It's very interesting that is how we are. There's no explanation for it as far as I know in science yet. But it's real. Is that right? A few more minutes.
You spoke about bringing our attention not so much on the suffering, but on the container, the loving kindness container around it.
Yeah.
So I guess the idea would be if there is no such container, to start out with, to kind of cultivate that container.
That's the first step.
And use that as sort of a meditative practice.
Right, because if we're just with our suffering, that can just lead to despair. Just sit in your suffering and watch it. I mean, that's not enough, right? So if we begin to cultivate a kindness, and a kindness in response to the little sufferings, I'm hungry, or I'm in a bad mood today, or little things, then we can strengthen it. But yeah, I really think that's what the mindfulness really needs to be about. What you said, loving awareness. That's the point of it. I think that was the point of it for the early Buddhists. The Buddha was also known as Sukhiya, the happy one. What was supposed to distinguish all these guys mostly was that they were all happy. They were all cheerful all the time. It was kind of interesting. And nowadays we forget that. In some Buddhist play, you get a little dour. It's kind of suspect if you're a little gushy. So.
I think that's another level of the operation of the inner critic, this notion of what we should have achieved spiritually. I'm not happy, there's something wrong with me, rather than just the nature of life. There's always going to be this up and down. So it's a big piece of the internalized inner critic that causes us a lot of suffering.
I grew up with that notion that if you know how to do life, you shouldn't suffer. I believe, so, and I didn't, not consciously, but that was, so there was always something wrong with me if I was not happy all the time. And by, you compare your insides to other people's outsides, it's very easy to think that other people are much happier, or at least they've got it all figured out, when I'm going through all this stuff inside all the time. So that was one of the things I got out of becoming a therapist. I thought, damn, everybody else is as big a mess as I am. It was kind of a relief to discover everything that I was going through. Other people were saying it, and I kept thinking, well, it was mine. We have to stop, Bruein.
Yeah. Thank
We
you,
do.
Tom. Yeah. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
Announcements. Are there any announcements?
Well, this isn't a new announcement, but I just want to mention that many of you have heard, some of you haven't, because of financial difficulties that the Sangha is experiencing. We've asked that people consider the window of their generosity to be in the $10 to $20 range, less if circumstances so dictate, more if circumstances so allow. And just to let you know, there is a noticeable difference, and I just want to say thank you on behalf of the Board of Directors.
I just want to let people know that Hal Hershey's had a recurrence of his leukemia, and he was taken off treatment recently because his body couldn't take the treatment anymore, so he's looking at going into hospice and facing his own death.
And today is his birthday.
Today's his birthday.
We have a host.
I'm Don. There's hot water for tea. There's snacks outside. You can put your dirty dishes in the sink or the dishwasher. I'll come around with the Donna baskets. People meet here at the front door around 12:30 to go to the lunch when we're gathering. I think that's it.
We could use another host in our rotation. A couple of people have had a need to withdraw from that kind of service. It's an easy, I would say, way to be of service to the Sangha. And so speak to me if you're drawn to helping out in that way. I'm begging.
Before I tell you who the speaker is, any more announcements? Before I tell you who the speaker is next week, I want to thank you again for your talk today, Tom. And it sort of speaks to, I love the word kindfulness and self-kindness. What I keep forgetting to do since I've become a facilitator here on the first Sunday is to share an experience I had at an LGBTQ silent retreat at Spirit Rock one time, where the two facilitators said, be kind to yourself and take care of yourself. Here at this space, we have blankets and cushions and pillows and things. If you're uncomfortable in any way, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Kindfulness. I keep meaning to say that, but I'm too much in my head and not in my heart. So thank you for making the whole topic about that.
Yeah.
Next week, J.D. Doyle on August 11th. J.D. Doyle serves as a core teacher at the East Bay Meditation Center and a board member and co-founder of the LGBTQ meditation group. And there's a lot more here you can read or check it online. Should we gather in a circle for the dedication of the room? By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.